So as usual, just the basic housekeeping. If you need to exit for an emergency, we'll go out this door here. We do have some water and coffee and snacks on the table in the back here if you'd like to get some of that. It's the first time I've ever made coffee in the new coffee maker. So it's a little weak, I'm told. And then restrooms are out this door here. Just make sure that you prop the door open when you come back out. But wow, what a 2019, huh? We did a lot of stuff. And we incorporated in March. So when I look back at all of that stuff that we did in such a short order, wow. Keith, thank you for putting together that video. That was really great. Thank you. That's good stuff. So I want to brag a little bit about the volunteering work that you all have been doing. When we set out to create this, one of the things that we really were thinking about was we just don't want, skeptics at the pub and that's all we do, right? We wanted to do more than that, and so doing this kind of stuff was on the list for sure, but we also wanted to do whatever it is that you all wanted to do. And so one of the very first things we did was the roadway cleanup program. Rachel reached out to Katie at Keep Polk County Beautiful and got all of that set up. And Katie has just been a dream to work with. Even we had somebody lodge some complaints against an atheist group having a sign in their neighborhood. And without any conversation or prompting, Katie responded right away, like, we can't discriminate on the basis of religious belief. So not that we would if we wanted to, but we support them in their trying to be good people in your community, doing good things. So that was one of the first things that we did. I want to break down just a little bit of what that impact looked like for us last year. So we have a 2.2 mile stretch of roadway where they normally give us a mile. Each group gets about a mile. They ask you to do like 4 cleanups a year. And we do that a month. Basically, we do two or 3 a month usually. So we've been trying to get the whole thing. We spend 2 or 3 hours out there. We've had 43 individual unique volunteers over the course of every cleanup that we've done. Yes. Did you count the people? Is that what you're saying? Well, they're holding hands in unity. So there you go. So that's, again, we had no idea how many people were going to be interested in a thing like this and come out to these events. So that was really great. We logged over 200 hours out on the roadway picking up trash. Yeah. And that's going to be even more in the coming year. We didn't start that until mid-year, and so we've got even more months to build on. But that's about 2 cleanups a month, 2 to 3 hours each time, and an average of 8 volunteers each time that we go out. We picked up 162 bags of litter and a bunch of old tires. It's a lot of trash, especially for the fellow that lived in the neighborhood who said, why are you letting the atheists put a sign up here? It's not that dirty. So I talked about this at our last cleanup, but I wanted to mention it again here. All of the hours that we invest in volunteering get reported to a couple of different places. We track all of them just for our own internal sort of knowing where we're at and what we're doing and what people are interested in. We send that information back to Keep Polk County Beautiful that manages the county roadway adoption program, which they can use to get grant money for their own cleanup efforts, the other things that they do. And then we also report it back to Foundation Beyond Belief. And they score the number of times that we do events and how long we do and how much, we get accomplished. And for each sort of event, you get points, and those points add up, and you move up levels, bronze, silver, and gold. And so in 2019, we made silver level. So that was fantastic. And with that comes the opportunity for us to ask them for money. So because we had gotten to the silver level, they gave us a grant of $250, which we used on our service project today. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit. This year we're going to get to gold easy, just because we got started midway to last year, and at the gold level we have the opportunity to get a $500 grant from Foundation Beyond Belief. So the silver grant reward that we got this year, we decided to partner again with the Hearth Project, which it's a local nonprofit. They do amazing work with students in our school system who are experiencing homelessness. And so the last time we just kind of did a general fundraiser and gifts in kind, and we raised about $800 worth of cash and goods to take to them. And so we thought, that's something that we want to keep going with and supporting them. There's about 3,700 students every year who qualify under the terms of what homelessness is to the government. So in 2019, we got to the silver level. We're using that grant to do hygiene packs. So one of the things that Hearth does is they do hygiene packs for the students, and it's got toothpaste and toothbrush and soap and deodorant and a washcloth and that sort of thing, all the things they might need. So hopefully you were asked on your way in to pack one of those up. We'd love for you to pack more of them up as we wrap up today. We were able to, with that grant and a little bit more from the ACPC funds, we were going to put together about, is it 48? 48 bags that we'll then take down to Hearth, and they will distribute them out to the students in our county that need them. So that's really awesome. And that's all because of the volunteer work that the volunteers have come out and put in to get us there. So thank you so much for all of that. Yes. So when I think back on 2019, there was there are some standout people that just sort of show up to do all the things. Some people just buy in right away, and this is just a great thing. And so we thought it would be fun to start to do some awards, and hopefully we'll add some more as the years go on, come up with other fun things. But what we did this year was a volunteer award. So our volunteer of the year was Kenneth, who comes out to almost all of the cleanups. He's only missed a couple. And he posted something on his Facebook about how his wife can just, we're all sobbing, since he started coming out and doing this work, and that had given him something to sort of live for again, and that she can just see the glow restored in him and all of this. And that's why we did this. It's that kind of stuff that just keeps us going and makes us want to do more and clone myself so that there's more time, more hours in the day. But we awarded that to Kenneth out at the last cleanup, of course. We add up all the hours and all that everybody does, and we thought it would be kind of nice to award the person who's put in the most volunteer hours in 2019, and we'll, of course, continue to keep track. And that person is Kenneth.
Hey,
Kenneth,
you
put in the most volunteer hours 2019, so we wanted to get you a little something.
Oh, shoot.
To say thank you for being a committed volunteer.
Cool.
Thank you,
Appreciate
Kenneth.
Thank you, Kenneth.
Cool.
He had no idea. No idea it was coming. So, well done, Kenneth, for being our volunteer of the year. Big round of applause for Kenneth, yes. All right, and that's going to bring us to the presentation today, and then I'll come back and we'll talk about some other things that are coming up. So our guest today is Dan Dana. He's a conflict doctor. Is the founder, now retired, of Mediation Training Institute International, which is now housed at Eckerd College in St. Petersburg. Holding a PhD in psychology, Dr. Dana is the author of books and curricula that make the magic of mediation accessible to everyday people in their homes, communities, and workplaces. And so today's presentation draws together a 45-year career into guidance that we can all use and take away and use in our own lives. So please welcome Dan Dana.
And it's great to be among free-thinking, reasonable people. Susan and I, my co-partner in crime here, we're in Sarasota, Florida, have been for 7 years. Prior to that, we were, as we say in Sarasota, up north, which is just about anywhere north of here. And so we are full-time Sarasota residents and members of the secular humanists of Sarasota Bay, which is the local atheist, non-believing community. And so that has become quite a central part of our social lives, because that group has about, 120 or 30 or 40 so members, not all of whom show up at any one event at the same time, but they're like spin-off groups from that have become, our primary social network in Sarasota, and it's a pocket of liberalism within Trump country, as I think you are here, if I'm not mistaken. So we're metastasizing. Yeah, that's right. Just like cancer. So I want to thank Sarah and Becca and various co-conspirators for this invitation to share a bit of time with you today. Let me give you, by the way, in addition to having been a mediator in my career, and that's kind of the subject of the talk, and the reason it might be relevant to an atheist community is it is a science-based presentation about mediation and human nature. The backstory on that is that about a year and a half ago, Mediation Training Institute, which Sarah mentioned, is now housed at Eckerd College. And so I attend and am usually a speaker at the annual conference of MTI, as we call it. And so we were there a year and a half ago or so, or January of a year or two ago. And MTI is an international organization, has people there from around the world. And we've been to Africa a number of times, to various parts of Africa. In fact, 11 trips to Africa, if I'm still counting. And so there was a group there, a couple of gentlemen who were from Kenya. And they were there at the behest of the Supreme Court of Kenya, because they were looking for resources to help diminish the caseload of civil cases in Kenya. Same problem that we have in this country, except it's much, much worse. It's years before you can actually get a court date. So that really puts the kibosh on litigated civil cases. I'm not a lawyer, by the way. I'm a psychologist, but I've picked up some lingo from lawyer friends, recovering lawyers who find themselves gravitating toward mediation. And so, in any case, I'll try to make this reasonably brief because the presentation itself is an hour, so I don't want to keep you too long. In any case, I was invited by those gentlemen to come to Nairobi a year ago this past July and give the keynote speech for a conference that was organized by the Supreme Court of Kenya for the purpose of trying to grow the notion of mediation in society. Now, not being a lawyer, I couldn't say much about how they handle that in the courts, but as you'll see, I was able to present information about how mediation can be more broadly conceived and used in other parts of society, including family life, community life, and work life. And so I worked about 3 months. I had never really given a keynote. Now, I've been a speaker and a trainer and a teacher for 50 years, but I had never given a keynote address. And I didn't know how to do that. So I need to write this. I can't just spontaneously combust on stage like I sometimes do as a teacher. And so I gave a lot of thought to this presentation, and that's what I'm going to share with you today. I have altered it somewhat. So that conference was for primarily attorneys and some early stage professional mediators in Kenya. But I've modified it so that it's usable and addressable to the general public. So this is not for lawyers, and it's not for psychologists, and it's not for professionals in the field. It's just for folks like all of us who have lives, family lives, community lives, work lives. So that's what I want to share with you today. And I have the presentation on a teleprompter here in my pocket. Now, I'm going to have to be a two-fisted speaker today because this usually sits on a podium of some kind, but with your permission, I will hold it in one hand. Ooh, sorry. Would you like to join us? And I'll, is the microphone working? Is sound is okay? Okay. So I've not done this before. If I have to scratch my nose, I don't know what I'll do. I'll have to ask Susan to help me scratch my nose, I guess. So at any rate, I'd like to share with you this presentation, which is about an hour. If you get too sleepy, I think it's kind of interesting myself, but if you get bored, take a nap. I won't take offense. So in any case, here we go. And let's see, that's the last slide, I think, isn't it?
No, it might be the last one, but it's also.
Okay, there we go. So I thank you for this opportunity to share some thoughts about how the tools of the professional mediator might be put into the hands of anyone who occasionally encounters interpersonal situations at work or at home that disrupt the peace and tranquility of everyday life. Let's face it, that's most of us. I'm a retired mediator. My 40-year career focused on uncovering the core essence of mediation and probing the psychology of how and why it works. I devised 3 simple communication tools that bring mediation down from the ivory tower of academics and out of the offices of lawyers and psychotherapists and into the homes and workplaces of the rest of us. In retirement, with talks like this one, I strive to help people, perhaps like you, who are too busy living your everyday lives to sit and ponder the eternal conundrum of how to get from conflict to cooperation, from anger to affection, from distrust to trust, from disrespect to respect, from estrangement to reconnection, from hostility to kindness, and even perhaps from hatred to love. This presentation is adapted from a keynote address that I originally prepared for professional conferences of mediators and attorneys. I hope you find it both thought-provoking and of value in your own everyday life. Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right-doing, there is a field. I will meet you there. Those words are from Rumi, a poet and philosopher who lived 800 years ago in a part of Persia that is now in Afghanistan. Indeed, in our few minutes together today, I hope to unpack the profound wisdom and practical guidance that is embedded in Rumi's statement. Let me repeat it. Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right-doing, there is a field. I will meet you there. Rumi's deep insight into the essence of human conflict and how we might manage it is as relevant today as it was 800 years ago, and will surely remain relevant for another 800 years. Indeed, I believe his truth applied when humans first developed language some 100,000 years in the past, and that truth will still pertain to the daily lives of our own descendants 100,000 years into the future. Human nature changes slowly. So this message is not just for today, or this year, or this lifetime. Conflict and our struggle to manage it is as inherent to our humanity as wet is to water. We must deal with it. To ignore it is to fail ourselves and to fail our fellow travelers along this bumpy road of life. The word conflict means different things to different people. Even mediators define it differently. Some mediators are lawyers who were trained in the adversarial arts. Many mediators come from other fields of endeavor. I happen to be a psychologist. My training was in behavioral science. From a psychological perspective, conflict has structural, emotional, cognitive, and behavioral components. First, structurally, it is a condition between people. Conflict does not occur within a person. It arises as a product of human relationships. It is a social condition in every marriage, family, workplace, community, business enterprise, government agency, and nation. And as newspaper headlines report daily, conflict flourishes between countries, cultures, and every other category of people on our planet. Wherever there's a distinction between self and other, between you and me, between us and them, conflict rears its angry head. It intrudes, it disrupts, and if poorly managed, it destroys. Second, people in conflict are interdependent. We need each other. At the very least, I need you to get out of my way so that I can have what I want. Often the needs for which we depend on others are financial, practical, and tangible. But the most important needs we have of others are intangible. I need your attention, your creative ideas, your support, your honest labor, your trustworthiness, and from certain others, of course, your love. Life without the benefits we receive from other people would be unsustainable and perhaps not even worth living. It may be true, theoretically, that people who are not interdependent have no conflict. But no one is an island in the social sea that surrounds us. The third element is people in conflict are angry. Anger is, of course, an emotion. Indeed, it is the defining emotion of conflict. That is, when anger is not present, people are simply in rational disagreement. Simple, unemotional disagreements can be resolved by reasonable compromise or by simply ignoring our differences. True, anger can be suppressed and may not be outwardly expressed. Sometimes it is unconscious and denied, even hidden from ourselves. But anger is present in every conflict. Anger is the fuel that supplies the energy that drives conflict. Subjects about which we may disagree, but that do not evoke anger, can be discussed rationally and answers can be easily found. We can even amicably agree to disagree. I may believe that blue is the most beautiful color, where you may prefer green. Max Nix. There is no necessity that we agree about that. But anger, whether overtly expressed or unconsciously suppressed, makes conversation difficult on subjects about which we need to find a common path forward that we must walk together. Next, the fourth element of our definition, people find fault with their partners in the dance of conflict, that is, with their opponents. It may seem to me that our conflict is entirely due to your stupidity, your selfishness, your stubbornness, or other faults in you that I perceive as the cause of our impasse. I believe that if only you would change those things about you, our conflict would be quickly and easily resolved. Simple. Of course, this perception of fault is nearly always reciprocal. You believe it is my stupidity, my selfishness, my stubbornness that is the obstacle to agreement. We both perceive the other to be the one at fault. This is the cognitive component of conflict. Fifth, and finally, we behave in ways that make our disagreement a problem. Without behavior, that is, without acting out our anger in ways that splash our toxic bile on others, conflict would not be a concern. There would be no need for a solution. As a wise car mechanic once said, if it ain't broken, don't fix it. However, too often, relationships do get broken. How can broken relationships be fixed? Let's start by looking under the hood, by looking within us, within our species, for where these psychological elements of conflict come from. Time for a whistle wetting moment. We owe to our prehistoric ancestors the two natural behaviors that we commonly use to cope with conflict. In my contributions to the literature of the field, I call these behaviors walkaways and power plays, also known as the flight or fight reflex. We may seek to avoid the troublesome opponent, or if forced to interact, we seek to overpower him or her with our superior logic, morals, or muscles, or more tragically, our weapons. We may at first imagine that we can handle the situation by distancing from the other, that is, by avoiding direct interaction altogether. If distancing fails, and we are compelled to engage, we imagine that we can win by coercing the other, forcing him or her to comply with our demands. I can flee, or I can fight. These are my instinctive reactions when threats to my safety arise. In my primitive brain, the brain that has been evolving and adapting for millions, actually hundreds of millions of years, these are my only two options. My primitive mind believes that my very survival depends on making the correct choice and making it immediately. The amygdala is the primitive organ buried deep within our brains that evolution has constructed to help us survive in emergency situations, especially life or death situations. Should I escape from that predator, or should I fight back? Do I eat it, or does it eat me? Our ancient ancestors' lives depended on their answer. Every one of us in this room today is the descendant of an unbroken chain of millions of generations of successful ancestors who made good enough choices in dangerous circumstances, at least good enough long enough to procreate and thereby pass along their genetic code to the next generation. So here we are in the year 2020, carrying the genetic baggage that our ancestors left for us. In modern times, of course, we rarely encounter a dangerous predator to whom we look like food. But our primitive amygdalas don't know that anything has changed since our pre-human mammalian ancestors, who were small rodents at the time, shared the earth with dinosaurs, and even earlier. Our amygdalas continue to prompt us to react quickly and defensively to any perceived threat to our well-being. Our inner animal prepares us to react with either evasion or aggression, flight or fight, walkaways or power plays. These are the two forms of instinctive, self-protective behavior that remain within us, even as we sit quietly and peacefully in this room today. Defensive acting out by means of aggression, which we have defined here as power play, perpetuates a retaliatory cycle in which I get you back for the last time you got me back, for the last time I got you back, for the last time you got me back, ad infinitum. A vicious cycle of blame and retribution, attack and counterattack, that continues until either one of us is defeated by the other's successful power play, which forces compliance with the will of the victor, or two, until we terminate our relationship by a final walkaway, a divorce, a resignation, a firing, or by just giving up. The alternative way of acting out, that is by evasion or walkaways, is no less harmful in our highly interdependent modern daily lives. By refusing to communicate, by withdrawing from constructive dialogue, we also risk triggering a retaliatory cycle with the others, just as we do by using power plays. It is as if we say, well, if you're going to avoid me, then I'll avoid you too. We both retreat into our seemingly safe corners, which has the effect of draining our relationship of its value, of the very benefits that led us to join together in the first place. The terms loveless marriage and, in the workplace, dead wood have been invented to denote these sterile relationships. What can be done when retaliatory cycles of power plays and walkaways have led to dysfunctional relationships, whether in open, obvious conflict or in silent, sterile standoffs? How do we expert mediators handle this challenge? So far, I've painted a rather bleak picture of human nature. We seem doomed by our animal instincts to an awful dilemma, a bilateral choice between two stark options. But our reflex to either walk away or power play when faced with a threat is only part of the picture. It's only part of who we are. Fortunately, another instinct, a more hopeful one, lies awaiting our discovery. This peacemaking reflex offers a powerful tool to any observant person. We can leverage this conciliatory instinct to produce voluntary concessions toward reasonable compromise. But first, let's recognize that conflicts appear in a wide range of settings, from the courts of justice to the factory floor, to the family home. The courts use a method of resolution called adjudication, a way of achieving outcomes in which someone wins and someone loses. Judiciaries have devised alternatives to adjudication, called alternative dispute resolution, or ADR, which are less expensive and less time-consuming than courtroom procedures. Mediation and arbitration are among the forms of ADR that have become widely used throughout the United States and in many other countries for reaching resolution of civil, that is, non-criminal cases. Generally, civil disputes are settled by financial payments, which constitute the final gasp of the dying relationship between the parties. My career involved disputes that are not amenable to settlement with money. That is, the parties will remain in an ongoing interdependent relationship. They need to be able to interact cooperatively tomorrow, and the next day, and the next. How can the ability to behave cooperatively in the future be achieved? How can we become voluntarily willing to work together in a spirit of teamwork? How can a domestic couple in a troubled marriage recapture mutual affection and resume living together in a happy home? Clearly, not by financial settlement. As we all know, money can't buy happiness, nor can it buy creative teamwork, nor can it buy loyalty, nor can it buy trust. What promise does mediation hold for people who are experiencing conflict in ongoing interdependent relationships? Let's step back a moment and reflect on Harvard University professor William Urey's observation that there are 3 and only 3 ways to approach any conflict. We can view it as a power contest, or as a rights contest, or as an interest-based effort to uncover overlapping self-interests, also called the common ground of the disputing parties, on which we may find reasonable and acceptable compromise, and sometimes even discover creative win-win solutions. Before our ancestors invented laws, conflicts were normally handled as power contests. The individuals with the biggest muscles, the biggest clubs, or the most intimidating threats were the winners. There was no recourse for weaker individuals beyond submitting to the uncertain mercies of the winner. A great leap forward toward modern civilization occurred about 5,000 years ago, a mere blink of an eye in human history, when ancient Egyptians invented the first civil code, a set of rules containing the concepts of impartiality and social equality. Sumerians, Babylonians, and Assyrians further developed what we today consider the law in European tradition. Early societies in China, India, Africa, and the Americas also developed legal theories and practices for resolving conflicts non-violently. The application of law constitutes a rights contest and produces what we call justice. Every citizen who wishes to live in a fair and just society would surely agree that rights contests are preferable to unrestrained power contests and lawlessness. Mediation, on the other hand, and by its very nature, is a non-adversarial, interest-based approach. It is here that Rumi reminds us that determining which party is the wrongdoer and which is the right doer is not the task before us. He urges us to recognize that there is a field where common ground may be found. If our shared need is to live together in peace or to work together cooperatively, the judgment of right or wrong, innocent or guilty, good or bad, does not advance our movement toward that common goal. To repeat, out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I will meet you there. Mediators attempt to help disputing parties reach agreement based on their own self-defined, underlying self-interests. We are neutral, which means we have no personal stake in the content of those agreements. And we are impartial, meaning that we are unaligned with either party. We are in the service of agreement itself. I believe that all practicing mediators, whether in legal or non-legal settings, would agree that these principles of neutrality and impartiality, applied in a mutual search for common ground, bridging the self-interests of all disputants, define the very nature of our trade. By the way, are there any lawyers here? Did you do mediation? Were you familiar with mediation in your practice?
Yeah, we did some. We used the courts definitely from California pushed ADR
Okay.
quite a bit.
Okay. When I'm done with this formal presentation, we'll just have a chat about what people know about this, have heard about this, your experience with it, and so on. So it'll be
Well, I also have a background in Chinese history.
okay.
Chinese had a little attitude about lawsuits. If in the old days, if you were involved in 3 lawsuits, you were sent to a malarial region.
There's a creative idea.
100 things that can happen in a lawsuit, 99 are bad.
Yeah. And I also heard it said that no one wins a lawsuit except the lawyers.
Well, that could be the case.
That's often the case, yeah. Okay, but we'll check back with you. A few minutes ago, I hinted at the existence of an instinct that we have inherited from our ancient ancestors that can help us make peace instead of war, that can help us find reasonable compromise in contentious, ongoing, interdependent relationships. It acts as part of a natural braking system that can prevent crashes when conflicts arise. We can harness that instinct to help us find agreement even when the disputing parties themselves believe no agreement is possible. And that's quite typically the case in mediation, by the way. No one thinks it'll work except the mediator. Where is the brake pedal? That instinct is the conciliatory gesture. Let me illustrate. Imagine 2 animals, adult members of the same species, on a typical lazy afternoon in the Serengeti. Their species is social, meaning that they live together in groups with an internal hierarchy. And their species is also predatory and territorial, meaning that they kill other animals for food and protect boundaries around their home turf or hunting ground from intrusion by others. That is, in the abstract, they make a distinction between mine and not mine. Now, let's imagine that one of the animals, let's call him the homeowner, is peacefully lounging within the boundaries of his self-defined territory, enjoying his food, the companionship of trusted friends, his mates, his safety, and other possessions that constitute his personal wealth. Suddenly, the homeowner notices a stranger approaching. Once that stranger crosses that invisible line separating mine from not mine, a pattern of instinctive reactions is set in motion. The homeowner is compelled by instinct to challenge the intruding stranger. The survival of his species over eons of time has depended on fierce protection of personal property. He rushes to encounter the intruder, displaying aggressive behaviors to demonstrate his superior strength and fierce defense of what belongs to him. Usually the intruder, who is venturing into a foreign land, is intimidated by the homeowner's aggressive display and promptly withdraws beyond the boundary of the homeowner's territory. Sometimes, however, the stranger feels he may be capable of successfully repelling and overcoming the homeowner's defensive actions, and by doing so acquire some of that coveted property. A fight ensues. The two animals join in a battle for dominance. A territorial dispute is underway. But their battle is typically not a fight to the death. Adult members of the same species rarely actually kill each other. As predators, they kill animals not of their species for food, but they don't kill their own kind. What prevents fatal outcomes of turf battles? How does their territorial dispute come to an end short of death? Of course, the flight reflex provides one avenue of escape. But sometimes all escape routes are blocked. What then? What can the defeated animal do to survive this encounter? Another instinct, actually a pair of instincts, acting in tandem, now comes into play. A hidden behavioral tool designed over eons of evolution precisely for this situation comes to the rescue. The first of this pair of instinctive tools is the conciliatory gesture. Members of species that are social and territorial are able to recognize the symbolic meaning of certain observable behaviors that are characteristic of their species. In some species, that behavior is rolling over to reveal their soft underbelly. That works for me. In others, it is presenting the unprotected side of the neck. In others, it is averting their gaze from the victor's eyes. Every species has its mutually recognized behavioral language to signal submission. But a feature that is common to all conciliatory gestures is voluntary vulnerability. It is as if the defeated animal is saying, "Here, I will not resist if you choose to kill me." But animals are not suicidal. Their instinct is to survive, to perpetuate their species. The invitation offered by the loser to the winner to strike the fatal blow is made with the instinctive understanding that the winner will not accept the invitation. The submissive individual knows, in his primitive animal brain, that his conciliatory gesture will stimulate or trigger the second of our pair of instincts, which will enable him to survive this encounter with his life, if not his dignity and social status, intact. That second instinct is the inhibitory reflex, or the inhibition of aggression. He knows that the winner of this skirmish, whose sharp fangs are hovering over his vulnerable tummy, ready to bite, will be muzzled by instinct from doing so. As long as his conciliatory gesture is convincingly authentic, the winner will not, in fact, exploit that vulnerability. A few tense moments may ensue, but the winner will reliably suspend hostilities, allowing the loser to slowly slink away from the humiliating scene, tail between his legs, in abject defeat. But as he leaves, he carries with him his genetic information, preserved by having survived this life-threatening encounter, ready to mate and pass along those genes to the next generation, and the next, and the next. Each one of us sitting in this room today is a direct descendant in that eons-long line of survivors. Obviously, we are not descendants of those who did not survive. Think about that. This is evolution by natural selection in action. Time for another whistle wet moment. So this paired mechanism of the conciliatory gesture and the inhibitory reflex succeeds in preventing murder in nearly every social territorial species of animal on Earth, except one. That exception is us, Homo sapiens. We like to think we are special. Yes, we are especially prone to violence among ourselves. The dynamics of human conflict compared with non-human species are complicated by at least two characteristics that are unique to us. We have developed symbolic language, and we have developed weapons technology. Most modern-day conflict in our families, our workplaces, and our communities takes place by means of language, both written and spoken, and sometimes tweeted. Although language is vital to human civilization, it also enables us to conceal our true intentions or to partially reveal them through that uniquely human hybrid passive aggression. The trickery of blending both friendly and hostile messages into a mixed narrative, a word stew of muddled ingredients, leads to misunderstanding of others' true intentions and other communication pitfalls. The pages of social psychology textbooks are richly illustrated with the myriad ways that we simultaneously inform and deceive each other. Before we developed weapons technology, our ancestors were limited mostly to the use of bare hands and feet to threaten or inflict harm on competitors and intruders. Our species lacks natural weapons, that is, fanged teeth, sharp claws, and other body parts that serve as equipment for hunting and killing prey for food. Our present-day fingernails, our toenails, and our cuspids, or canine teeth, are vestigial body parts, shrunken remnants of once useful tools that equipped our pre-human predecessors for hunting and for territorial battle. Only a few non-human species today employ tools that are not body parts, that is, unnatural weapons for attacking others. Try that whistle wetting thing again. Notable among those species is our closest modern relative, our cousin, the chimpanzee, with whom we share 96% of our DNA, and we share a common ancestor who lived about 7 million years ago. Even today's chimps are mostly limited to simple sticks and stones as tools for doing battle. In periods of remarkable technological innovation since our evolutionary path parted ways from that of our modern chimp cousins, we humans have invented spears, sharpened stones, metal blades, explosives, guns, and even nuclear bombs to carry out our aggressive intentions. With each new level of advancing weapons technology, the aggressor is ever more distantly removed from direct observation of the victim. The victim's conciliatory gestures may never be witnessed by the aggressor, thereby disabling the inhibitory reflex. The instinctual inhibition of aggression impulse is disarmed, removed from our inherited conflict management toolbox. Thankfully, most conflicts are carried out with language, not with weapons. So the presence of conciliatory gestures and the inhibitory reflex, which remain submerged within our psyches, is still discernible in our speech and is accessible for a strategic deployment by the perceptive peacemaker. As I stated a few minutes ago, my career in mediation was devoted to interpersonal conflicts between people in ongoing interdependent relationships that had not escalated into the toxic realm of litigation. My focus has been on nettlesome conflicts in families, workplaces, and communities in which people desired to remain in relationship but were having trouble making those relationships work to their satisfaction. So let's turn our attention from mediation as a field of professional practice to the more commonplace challenge of how everyday conflicts may be effectively mediated, even prevented entirely. How can we leverage our natural animalistic instincts to resolve our disputes? What tools can we take from the mediator's toolbox to equip us for everyday peacemaking? Managerial mediation may be the simplest possible form of neutral third-party intervention. As the term implies, it is most commonly used in organizations where managers, team leaders, and human resource personnel convene conversations between disputing employees to address workplace issues that are impeding performance and productivity and profitability and the quality of work life. Happily, this procedure can also be used with minor adjustments in non-organizational settings, even in families. I recall a heartwarming case in which my middle-aged student reported mediating between her adult sister and their aging mother, who had been estranged for over 20 years. One conversation of only a couple of hours transformed their lives, restored their family bond, and brought immense emotional relief. So, managerial mediation is not just for managers. But what can be done when a conflict involves oneself and another person with whom you personally have an ongoing interdependent relationship that matters to you, at work or at home, even with your spouse? Is there no recourse when there is no neutral third party available to mediate? I'm pleased to say that yes, you can do it yourself with self-mediation. That is, mediation without a mediator. Thousands of my students over the years have reported using self-mediation to restore damaged friendships, to repair business partnerships, and even to rescue failing marriages from the slippery slope of growing alienation. I suspect some of you in this room may be thinking at this very moment of current or past relationships that have caused you concern and that might have benefited from the healing dialogue of self-mediation. Maybe it's not too late. I recognize that some professional mediators may object to my use of the term mediation for this process, since mediation is normally defined as the role of a third party. In response, I argue that the functions of a mediator are, in fact, being performed. They are just not embodied in a separate third person. Rather, they are embodied in the person who initiates the self-mediation process, the one who bravely and skillfully invites the other to have a conversation about a shared problem. Regardless of nomenclature, this procedure is a good way to talk constructively about troublesome differences and is certainly preferable to relying on walkaways and power plays, those inborn, instinctive, familiar tools that our ancient ancestors have left in our genetic toolboxes. You may believe that we have now reduced mediation to its simplest possible form, but bear with me one more step along this reductionist path. Let's call this next and final step preventive mediation. Managerial mediation is mediation without a professional mediator. Self-mediation is mediation without a third party at all. Preventive mediation is mediation without even holding a distinct mediation event. It is mediation in real time that does not require stopping work or other ongoing activity to perform it. Regular use of preventive mediation can keep conflicts from arising at all. It takes place while life is going on. It stops conflict before it starts. Others may not even realize that you're doing it. Let me explain using concepts that we have already defined here today. What if we were to integrate what we have learned these past few minutes about walkaways, power plays, conciliatory gestures, and the inhibitory reflex to design a simple formula for how we might conduct ourselves routinely in everyday life? Consider adopting these 4 rules of engagement with your important people. First, never walk away. Stay engaged. Initiate dialogue about the troublesome topic, and certainly never refuse your partner's request to communicate. Once engaged, don't yield to your impulse to quit in frustration. Your amygdala wants you to either fight to win or to leave the scene. Do neither. Act how you deliberately and rationally choose to act, not how your million-year-old instincts impel you to act. Second, never power play. That is, don't use threat, intimidation, ultimatums, or even your authority as the other's boss to win this battle. Curb your amygdala. Third, take the risk of offering conciliatory gestures, even small ones when you can do so sincerely. Consider the power of apology, which I call the mother of all conciliatory gestures. Make a modest concession. Offer a compliment. Express sympathy. To quote Beatle and songwriter John Lennon, give peace a chance. That is, dangle a conciliatory gesture in view of the other person. His or her inhibitory reflex may be triggered. If not this time, then perhaps the next. The breakthrough to peace often arrives on the wings of patience. Fourth and finally, never exploit the other's conciliatory gestures to score a point. Don't interpret his cautious apology as admission of fault. Instead, express appreciation. Acknowledge his courage. Say thank you. Paradoxically, it takes strength to appear weak. To state what should be obvious, if I will need you tomorrow, if I need your trustworthiness as my friend, your loyalty as my employee, your respect as my boss, or your love as my spouse, the most self-destructive thing I can do is to win today's fight with you. In the long game, I will not win if I cause you to lose. Using preventive mediation places the power tools of the expert mediator into the hands of every person to build a non-adversarial win-win climate in which our most important relationships can thrive. It is like giving water to a thirsty plant. A well-watered plant produces flowers that add beauty to our home. All forms of mediation, from high-stakes business negotiations to everyday peacemaking, apply certain core principles that are so deeply embedded in human nature and so logical and so obvious as to seem unnecessary to even mention, except that they are so often violated in everyday life. The first core principle is, without communication, there can be no solution. Its corollary is equally obvious. Refusal to communicate ensures continuation of the conflict. So the mediator's most fundamental task is to convene a conversation between the parties. As in all negotiations, the most important seat is the seat at the table. The second core principle is we can't change the past. We can only change the future. So, as eager as we may be to establish that our opponent is to blame for our predicament, Doing so does not solve our joint problem. Indeed, insistence on assigning blame to the other or declaring one's own innocence only puts an obstacle in the path to progress toward finding a workable solution. We must accept the others and our own past conduct, the good, the bad, and the ugly, as historical fact, as permanent records stored in our memory banks. We can't unring a bell. We can't unsay a past remark. We can't undo a past deed. We can only agree to prevent their recurrence. Effective peacemaking, call it mediation if you prefer, in all ongoing interdependent relationships employs all three core principles. Effective mediators know this truth in their bones. So do effective everyday peacemakers. In our few minutes together today, we have traversed a broad landscape. We began our journey by examining instincts buried deep in our nature that arose millions of years ago in our far pre-human ancestors. We then briefly mentioned the development of law as a rights-based alternative to violence, beginning several thousand years ago when civilization as we know it today began to emerge from prehistory. Finally, we have arrived at today, where we discover that we can use our minds, that is, our magnificent cerebral cortex, that most human of body parts, to harness our primitive impulses and to construct tools, that is, behavioral technology, that enable us to elevate ourselves above ancient instinctual reflexes so that we may live and work together in peace, harmony, and productivity. The third core principle is that durable solutions require voice and choice, whether a marriage of two, a work team of 10, or a nation of millions. If we are to act in concert, in cooperation, and in peace, we must ensure that every person who will be affected by a decision must be given voice, that is, an opportunity to speak and be heard, whether face-to-face or in the voting booth. And each person must feel that his or her voice has meaningful impact on the eventual outcome, on the decision being made, on the plan being written. It is human nature to say, if I thought of it, then it must be a good idea. If I helped create it, then it must be a good thing. By ensuring voice and choice for each party in the decision-making and problem-solving process, we foster a sense of personal ownership of that solution and commitment to its implementation. If we fail to do so, we produce at best grudging compliance with the winner's demands. At worst, we sow the seeds of defiant rebellion and sabotage. This principle of voice and choice applies to happy marriages, to productive work teams, and to peaceful societies, and to every other form of human relationship across the spectrum. This is democracy, from the smallest to the largest scale of human affairs. We mediators believe our way is preferable to rights-based adjudication of civil disputes, especially in family courts where the well-being of vulnerable children is often at stake. Some mediators, especially those of us who seek to make the magic of our profession accessible to all people for everyday peacemaking, even agree with me that the essence of mediation can be distilled to its core simplicity and applied in our everyday lives. Peacemakers share my sense of satisfaction in contributing to the betterment of society, to building a wall of peace, one brick at a time, one conversation at a time, as a defense against the assault that conflict relentlessly wages against our daily pursuit of happiness. My purpose here today has not been to lecture about mediation as practiced by lawyers and psychologists. Rather, I simply hope that I have made a sensible case that tools for everyday peacemaking, derived from professional mediation and placed in the hands of all of us, can improve human relationships, especially those ongoing interdependent relationships that lie at the core of our own very personal reasons for living. I'll leave you with one final reminder from Rumi. Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I will meet you there. Thank you. Thanks for your patience. If there are questions, comments, things you'd like to discuss in relation to this, I'll be your guest.
If anyone has any questions, I'll run the microphone around. Just a reminder that there are folks who do regularly watch the video that just can't be here for one reason or another. So we'll try to be mindful of that when we pass the microphone around so that they can hear your question in addition to the answer.
Okay.
Questions?
Or disagreements. I'm good at disagreements.
Well, here you go.
Okay.
Since nobody's volunteering, I'll
Make
fill,
it
I'll fill in
non-violent.
the gap.
Non-violent, please, but I'm open.
One of my students just introduced me to something I hadn't heard before. We talk about the fight or flight response. And he says he's getting a licensure in counseling.
Mm-hmm.
And he says he's being told that there's fight, flight, freeze.
Right.
I'd never heard of freeze. But,
Okay.
but when I think about it, yeah, there are many animals whose answer is freeze.
Right. Yeah. It's a defensive mechanism that is found in the animal world and in humans. If you find yourself being subject to abuse, physical abuse, let's say in the home, then people can just, freeze up and say, this is the best way to deal with this. I can't get away. I can't get any authority to help stop this, so just freeze. So it is a defensive mechanism. I left it out of this presentation just for simplicity. And most people are familiar with fight or flight. The freeze is something that's somewhat more recently found.
Apparently new. I hadn't heard of it until he mentioned
But it is found in the animal world.
Thank you. That's very intriguing. So is this lecture, this presentation on your website?
Mm-hmm.
It is? We can see it there?
As a matter of fact, I have no proprietary interest in this. I am completely retired. I'm not looking for work. I don't need to be paid for things.
What a great place to be in.
It is. I recommend it. If you get old enough to retire, I'd say do it. In any case, there's a link, and it's not on the website, but I can send it to you. It has a voice recording in a studio of my presentation. It has the PowerPoints. It has a letter to invite the presentation. It has the slide. It has everything you see here today, and that's free.
Cool. Our daughter is a licensed California attorney, but she's now living here in Orlando, and she is a licensed Florida mediator.
Okay.
And I think that she could benefit considerably from this.
Sure.
I told you I had a background in Chinese history. I went through a PhD in Chinese history before I went to law school. And in China, they really, really discouraged lawsuits and advocated mediation. So that was generally the way. And I think I may have taken some of that to my practice of law because I know I was told by a number of attorneys that I had a very creative way of approaching disputes between the clients. And I didn't think about it until you just mentioned this, and I'm thinking maybe I incorporated that into my own approach to the practice of law.
I've known of the Chinese, the ubiquity of Chinese mediation for a couple of decades anyway. Maybe it goes back before that. The criticism I've heard of it, and I've not been there to witness this, so I've not really examined it, is that mediators in China, in Chinese society, typically have authority. So the Western version of mediation is, I have no authority over the content of this problem. I can't solve it for you. I will not solve it for you. In fact, you're professionally obliged not to suggest solutions. So you just help the other people find their own solution. My understanding from China, and you can check me on this if I'm wrong, is that the people who are the mediators are often the elders in villages or communities in which they mediate, but also they can influence the outcome with their authority. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was not a perfect world, and the elders did exercise a lot of authority, but that's also true in other traditional societies as well.
And it's true in the legal world here. Even in civil cases here, attorneys who mediate oftentimes say, well, do what you want, but here's what's going to happen. From my experience in the courts, you're going to lose your case. You better make some compromises here if you want this to work. So even in the Western world, mediation, at least in the legal sector, is not as neutral and impartial as we from the behavioral sciences, psychologists and counselors and social workers and so on who do mediation tend to be more clear that we're not there to participate in the content of the solution. We're there to help parties communicate and find their own. Great. Well, thanks for sharing that. And by all means, if I forget to do so, let me send you the link, which you can then share with your entire group, that has this presentation as a voice recording from a studio, and also the PowerPoints and other resources, including a teleprompter. So you can use a teleprompter on your phone. Good. Well, thank you very much. Other comments, questions, disagreements? Yes. Okay.
First, thanks for coming and giving that presentation. I think that it's so timely living. Oh, I'm sorry. This is on, right? Yeah, great. I think it's so timely. If you had given this speech to me 5 years ago, I would have thought, whatever, who cares? I seemed, my life is somewhat got a significant amount of conflict in certain arenas. It seems like these days have brought out, giving people license to say things that I thought were crazy. I was going to add a couple of words to that, but at any rate.
I think I know those words.
Yeah. I find that I'm more the flight than the fight type because I really don't want to have conflict in my life anymore. And we oftentimes will sit and think, do we really want to have these people in our life if this is what we keep getting?
Right.
And so it's not really a question, but I got to say, I keep asking myself, why do I even want to resolve this issue?
Mm-hmm. Right.
So
I could answer a long time because I think I know just where you're coming from, and share some of your predispositions. I've never been comfortable with conflict. They say there's a notion called a personal deficit theory of career selection. That is, you try to become an expert at that which you feel most inadequate about. And so I grew up in a family. I'm the third of 3 children. I was rather pampered by my loving mother. There was not conflict in the family. I wasn't beaten up. I have an older brother and older sister. I was not beaten up by my brother like many boys are. We weren't a sophisticated family, but we were a peaceful family. We were not mean to each other. There was no, cruelty and, personal, ad hominem criticisms of each other or demeaning of each other. And so, life was pretty good. And then I went to school and found out, everybody doesn't love me like my family does. So I was unequipped to deal with conflict, and I avoided it. I evaded it. I would comply. I would be a nice boy. I just want to get along. I just want to get along. And so all through my early part of my life, I was evasive or avoidant of conflict when I should have been assertive. So I abdicated what could be seen as my proper rights or to get things a little bit more my way. And then when I was in my master's program in counseling psychology, I discovered that dialogue works. It wasn't called mediation yet at that time, but conversations about differences can be a good thing. And I suddenly felt powerful. Not because I could win conflicts, but because I could survive them, And so my doctoral dissertation was on workplace conflict in 1976 and 77. So I've been a conflict specialist, for 50 years, close to 40, 50 years. I have, in moments of self-aggrandizement, I've imagined that I understand interpersonal conflict better than anybody in the world. Now, I'm not sure that's true, and I wouldn't make that claim anymore because I know there's a lot of people with, knowledge and talent in this field, but I think just interpersonal conflict is something that I now have a good grasp of. I'll mention that Susan and I, if I can say this, she says, "Oh no, what are you going to say?" No, you've heard this before. But this is a second marriage for us, by the way. I could talk about my first marriage and how it ended, if you like, but I'll just say that. Yeah. No, no need. Now, Trish, my ex-wife, and I are still good friends. We see each other. We socialize. They come visit us. We go to visit them. So there's no acrimony even in that divorced situation. But Susan and I have been together 25 years. We have differences, but we do not have what I would call conflicts. We never have an adversarial fight, and we never have. We've never been in a situation where we, are unkind or try to be coercive. We take a non-adversarial stance on every difference that comes up. And we're quite successful, I think, in just having a nice, peaceful, loving friendship. And so the personal value of applying this kind of stuff, I think, is significant. So those of us who like to have a peaceful life, free of conflict, find it workable. And I also agree with, I think, what you intimated or what you suggested is that if a relationship is toxic, it's not worth it. There's situations where you just can't get away because that person might be in your immediate family, and like if you have a kid, an adult child, you're not going to divorce your child, but it can be a challenge to manage a healthy relationship with that person. But I also avoid toxic relationships. If somebody seems kind of unreasonably caustic to me, I'll say, "Well, thank you very much. Have a good day. Maybe I'll see you at a distance on another occasion." Okay, but thanks for your comment, which I'll give you my response. Other comments, thoughts, questions, discussion points, personal revelations?
Thank you for invoking Rumi.
So you know about Rumi? Yeah. He's a Persian poet from about 1100 in Persia. Al-Aladdin. Okay.
That's his actual, I think, birth name.
Is it?
Al-Aladdin.
And he was in Jalalabad, I think, wasn't
Which
he?
is, I think, why.
Yeah.
So-and-so of this place.
I see. Okay.
Like Jesus of Nazareth, kind of.
I see. Another.
His insights are amazing.
Yeah.
And his poetry. There's a really interesting film that I'll see if I can dig it up and get it to you. It's a number of scholars reading his poetry and then elucidating the references.
Mhm.
Really,
Yeah.
really nice.
Yeah. The quote that I use here, out beyond ideas of wrongdoing, right doing, there's a field, I'll meet you there, is just, I discovered that, 30 years ago. And I've just, it's the most beautiful quote I've ever heard. Okay, thank you. There was another comment?
I was just kind of similar to what you were saying about boundaries and so forth. I have a favorite quote, favorite saying, that he who argues with a fool has met his match. So a lot of times I find that if I'm in conflict or having an argument with somebody, you just kind of go, we're never going to have common ground on this. And so it's like, whatever.
And since it depends on what you have at stake in that relationship, if it's just a quarrel about, should it be red or green, then, hey, I could care less. But sometimes things matter to you in a substantive way. And so some kind of assertiveness is called for, even with a challenging partner in that debate. But, yes.
I've appreciated some of the tools that I've picked up. Dan and I had separate lives before we met. I came from the medical field, and I would like for Dan to share with you. I've appreciated the automatic responses that I've gotten when I've just felt kind of like freeze. I don't know how to respond to that person. I don't know how to get out of this. And there's one just really cute one that Dan shares.
I know what you're talking about.
And I use it to this day. It's like, it's my armor.
Okay, this is a story from Newfoundland?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I was invited to do a seminar on conflict mediation for a group in St. John's, Newfoundland, many years ago. It's been 20 years probably. And it was organized by the court system. So everybody there was a lawyer, except me. And so they took me out to dinner one evening, and there were probably, 7 or 8 attorneys, one of whom, by the way, was on the Supreme Court of Newfoundland. So, there were some senior people there. And I was talking about this goody-goody, mediation, soft touch kind of stuff with these lawyers who were used to litigation. That's the way you solve problems, is by litigation. And so they were kind of testing me, I think. And one of them says, okay, what if somebody just made really a deeply critical comment to you, that said that you were incompetent and that you didn't know what the hell you're talking about and so on. What would you do? And my answer was, well, tell me about that. Tell me more. Tell me more. So the phrase "tell me more" is a very, shall we say, powerful way to respond to someone who was angry at you, criticizing you. Say, well, tell me more about that. And so they tell you more, and you listen to that. You try to understand, where they're coming from. You reflect back with active listening tools, which we're all familiar with, I'm sure, just to let them know that, yeah, I hear what you're saying. But then unless you have to do something, you can just simply accept their criticism and, thanks for sharing.
And then they laughed at you.
Yeah, they laughed at me. Yeah, when I made that remark, the table burst into laughter. That's the most bizarre thing they've ever heard. Yeah, that was a useful experience. We've used that a lot. Anything else you'd like to chat about?
There's a TV series, I don't think it exists anymore, called Odyssey, and they did an episode called Simple Justices. And one example impressed me greatly. Someone had lost control of their car and driven into a farmer's fence and damaged a large portion of the fence. And the magistrate or elder said, well, we can put you in jail, or you can spend 2 hours a day repairing the fence. And of course, he said, I'll repair the fence. And you could see that during the course of that repair, the two stopped becoming enemies and became friends.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a great application of non-judicial and yet judicial.
Right. Well, there have been a number of cases that I've mediated, and most of my mediation was in organizations. I was on faculty at a business school for, the first part of my career. And as a faculty member, of course, if you want to be a consultant too, you can sort of invite yourself into working with local organizations. I was in Hartford, Connecticut, which is the insurance capital of the world. So many of the insurance companies founded, they're based there, were my clients. And I remember on more than one occasion, but one really stands out. There was in fact, this was with a it was not an insurance company, the case I want to share with you. But it was a small company, and the founder had retired and left the company to his son, who was a young MBA. And the employees had worked in this company for a couple of decades. They all were, very loyal to the old man who was now retired. And the son comes in with this shiny new MBA, and he's going to run things the way a real business should be run, and starts pushing people around and doing things by the book. And so one of the key managers in this small company just said, I need to retire now. This is just too noxious. And yet the young MBA, the president who took over from his dad, realized, hey, you've got company knowledge, your institutional knowledge that I need. So I was called in to meet with them, and we mediated to discuss the situation and shared a lot. They shared family events in which the president was a little kid at the home of the other guy, and now he's a grown up. And they got up and hugged and cried. And I've seen tears many times in mediations between people in business organizations who just feel such emotional relief from the distress, the stress, the anxiety, the discomfort of this ongoing, chronic, apparently hopeless conflict. And they find that, so maybe we can coexist peacefully here and actually have some affection toward each other. So it does happen. Okay, any others? Anything else? Going 1, 2, 3. Well, thank you for your time and attention. Been great to meet you.
Thank you very much. All right, just a couple of quick things for you before we go. We'll have plenty of time to chat and discuss further if you'd like. Quick reminder about the Keith's photography project, Faces of the Faithless. If you haven't been a part of that and you would like to be, he does have his gear set up here so that you can partake in that. If you most of you, I think, have been here to see the sort of my elevator pitch presentation on that, so I won't go through it again. But let us know afterwards. We can chat about that a little further. Next month, as if you don't get to listen to me talk enough, next month I'm going to present on Project Blitz. And Project Blitz is the religious right's nefarious efforts to install Christian dominionism into our country, one state at a time, one law at a time. And they have a playbook from the Congressional Prayer Caucus Foundation called Project Blitz, where it details all of these plans and the things that they're trying to do. I presented this to the Orlando group last year. This is a very modified, I've almost stripped it down to nothing and started over again because it's changed. Every year they release a new version of this playbook with the plans that they have. And they tried to go underground recently. They've rebranded themselves. They figured out that we know what they're doing. But so that'll be next month's presentation. And also, please note the date change. So normally we do fourth Saturdays, but the library here had some availability issues this year that we weren't able to get every fourth Saturday throughout the year. So there are a few months that we had to sort of move around. So just kind of keep an eye on that. Check on the, somebody want to get the door for me, please? Thank you. Richard locked himself out. It's all right. So if you're following on Facebook or Meetup, or you're subscribed to the email list, we'll have those updated so that you know what's going on there. And then finally, that ties into the legislative agenda that has been finalized now. So the Florida legislature is running through session. There are a lot of bills out there that we've sort of got our eye on. But what we did is we took a handful of those, put them into a survey that you can go fill out and identify 3 to 5 things that are of interest to you, legislation that you think that we as a group should be focused on. And I mean, it's things from abortion rights to religious exemptions for vaccines to Bible classes in our schools. They just kind of, it really runs the range on things that are of interest to secular-minded people to start with, like the church-state separation stuff, but then, you know, also the things that sort of come along with the humanist values that we tend to lean towards. So what we'll do then is we'll take the results of the survey. We'll kind of find the things, the topics, the bills that are float to the top that seem to be of most importance, and then we're going to put together some legislative communication ideas, things that writing our Congress people, making phone calls, sending letters, social media awareness campaigns, that sort of thing, to sort of make sure that our voice as the secular community is heard when it comes to considering these bills. Okay, so that's kind of the plan there. You've got a week or so if you haven't filled this out and you want to. It's polkatheists.org/survey will get you there. There's links on the Facebook as well, Facebook and Twitter. And then I should have more information for you then next month on the 15th at the library meeting here on sort of where we're at with that. And thank you all for coming. Thank you again to Dr. Dan Dana for coming over and presenting for us. Thank you very much. And thank you for helping us with the Hearth project as well, for helping us bag those things up that will go to students in need in the county. That's very much appreciated. Thank you. All right, so plenty of time if you guys want to hang out and chat. Yes, there's still, no, the coffee is out. Yeah, coffee's out, but there's still donuts and cookies. I only had 1 cup.